Very early in the morning, the chief priests and the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin, the whole council, they make a decision. So they bind Jesus and they lead him away and hand him over to Pilate, the Roman governor who is now in the province of Judea, overseeing that region, stationed in Jerusalem. And they hand him over to Pilate because they aren't able, under Roman governance, to handle the death penalty, to deal that out onto people as they wish. They don't have that authority under Roman rule. This was something that Roman rule kept under their own purview as a way of moderating the politics of the region that they were inhabiting. And so they're left, the council is left to sort of play this political intrigue game. And they want Jesus off the playing field. They want him crucified. And so they try and leverage Pilate during this time of Passover when there are tens of thousands of people in Jerusalem, more than normal, this high intensity social moment. And so they're going to leverage the crowds. This actor that has been a protector for Jesus, ironically now becomes a pressure point for Pilate. So they bring him to Pilate and they try and pressure him by specifically inciting insurrectionist language. Because Pilate, as the Roman governor, would have every reason to deal out the death penalty for an insurrectionist, for somebody who was threatening the rule of Rome over that area. That was one of the reasons there was the test with, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Because if Jesus failed that trap, they would have ammo to leverage with Pilate, saying, oh, this person is trying to tell people not to pay taxes to Rome, trying to stir people up against Roman rule. So that's what they're trying to do. So they bring him to Pilate, and Pilate begins a trial to try, and he doesn't appreciate being pushed around, and he doesn't appreciate being the Roman governor and having the local Judean authorities try and manipulate him. I think he sees what's going on. So he starts a trial of his own for Jesus, and he asks Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus replies, Su leges. You say it is this way, or yes, it is as you have said. And the chief priests then go on to bring forward all these accusations that we heard the night before. And so Pilate kind of lets them do their thing and then asks again, aren't you going to say anything, Jesus? Are you going to mount a defense in this court case? Are you going to bring in testimonies or witnesses on your behalf? And Jesus sort of willingly allows the procedure to bring him to the end, to a determination that he will be crucified. And it's very important for Mark to highlight how willing Jesus is. From that moment of prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, Lord, your will be done, onward. This is Jesus being very willing to walk the path that is before him. He's not resisting in any way, which is that doesn't happen. People mount a defense, they call on witnesses, they try and clear their name because they know what's coming. This is capital punishment. But Jesus goes along with it. He makes no resistance. And this is strange. And this is amazing to Pilate. And so there seems to have been some sort of arrangement of goodwill for the people where Pilate and the Roman governance would release somebody who was imprisoned for crimes against Rome back to the Judean people once a year during this time. It seems to be a custom, Mark tells us. And so there's two people that are given as an opportunity for the Judean crowds to release. And I think Pilate wanted Jesus to be the one who was chosen by the crowds, and he had every right to think they would, because just not too long ago, chapter 11, these crowds were rallying for Jesus. And so he's like, all right, I'm going to find a way out of this manipulation that the Sanhedrin is trying to put over on me, and I'm going to get the crowds to release Jesus, and then they'll be put in their place. They'll know that they can't play games of political leverage with me. That's what Pilate is thinking. So he gives them Barabbas, an awful, murderous insurrectionist who threatens peace between Rome and the Judean people. And then he gives them Jesus. And I think for Pilate, he's thinking this is a no-brainer. Of course they're going to pick Jesus, given what we have just been seeing in terms of the crowd's support for Jesus. And the interesting thing is Barabbas, whether that was his name or a designator that Mark has given us, we don't know, but we have every inclination that that's his name. Barabbas, the name means son of the Father, Bar Abba, son of the Father. And so we have Barabbas, son of the Father, and we have Jesus, the Son of God. Those are the two options. And Barabbas is described here in Mark chapter 15, 6, 7, 8. Barabbas was in prison with insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. These are people who were trying to stir people into a violent revolt against Rome. And so he is exactly, as we've been pointing out all through Mark is showing us, he's exactly the kind of figure Jesus is not. Jesus had every opportunity to become a Barabbas, a violent leader, getting crowds against Rome, to overthrow Rome, to set up things his own way. He had every opportunity to do that, and every opportunity he chose not to. So we finally get in this very overt symbolism a choice. Will the crowds, will everyone in Jerusalem pick this violent insurrectionist version of Jesus, or will they pick the Jesus who rode in on a colt, a sign of peace, who has been going along with this knowing it's going to lead to his death? And so, of course, what did the crowds say? That, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Sanhedrin, they kind of stir people up. And so Pilate asks, who do you want me to release to you? And here's the line in verse 10. Knowing it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. Pilate knows Jesus is a thorn in their side, but against Rome, he's done nothing. So there's no reason for crucifixion in the eyes of Roman law. And so what do the crowd say? Crucify him. This is just like Mark chapter 6 with King Herod, figure in power, who is pressured by the crowds, by his wife, by his daughter, by his rich friends, into making a decision he doesn't want to make. Pilate is pressured to make an illegal decision in the eyes of Rome by the crowds. And so here are two figures of authority who have proven themselves unworthy, as Mark shows us. And of course, Mark is saying that this is all a coronation narrative for Jesus, this ironic coronation, which we're going to see here in just a minute. Jesus is, in fact, that figure of authority who is worthy of our allegiance and who isn't going to be pushed around by the pressure of the crowd. And that is one of the biggest things that Mark wants us to understand here. And so they take him out to be crucified. Verse 16. This is something that we have, and every indication from historians like Josephus and Tacitus, that this kind of stuff happens, where the soldiers who are in charge of crucifixions would engage in mockery and in making their victims suffer in creative and sadistic ways. This was part of the way things happened. They would try out different methods of torture throughout it, and they would kind of brag with their comrades of who was doing the best job, and they would find fun ways to mock their victims. And it was just this brutal thing. And Mark is highlighting this because the moment of crucifixion is as humiliating as anything we could possibly imagine for Jesus. Crucifixion was the method of capital punishment that you inflict upon insurrectionists, upon slaves, upon people who challenged the power and the authority of Rome. And it was this brutal statement-making machine, which told you that the empire of Rome has every right to inflict upon you and upon your life the desires of the empire and the order of the empire. And if you stand in that way, if you upset the order, the natural order as determined by Rome, this is what you get. You get this brutal death that's very public. You've been flogged. You're usually naked. You're up there for all to see. You're hung high so that you're on a road going in and out of town so that everyone coming gets to see the statement that is being made, the statement of violent power that is bend to the will of Rome or else. That's what this is. It is a moment of complete humiliation. And Mark goes to pains to show us that not only is Jesus humiliated, but he's also abandoned. All of the disciples have run away. The religious elders are against him and have gotten him into the situation. They're the ones who are supposed to be vigilant and watching out for the Messiah. They're against him. And then, of course, we're getting to the crucifixion. And he recounts in chapter 15, verses 33, 34, he recounts some lines from Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? The anguish and the humiliation of Jesus is total in this moment. And there's not really a way that I think we can truly feel the amount, the weight, the hardness that Jesus felt in that moment. I just don't think it's accessible to us. But he brings forward this line from Psalm 22. And this is the second reference to Psalm 22 already. The casting of lots over the garments, that's a line from Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's hard. There's a sense in which God is allowing this awful thing to happen. And that is hard for us to wrestle with. That's hard for Jesus to wrestle with. And then he comes to his final breath, verse 37. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed out his final breath. He breathed his last. And here's an interesting moment. When seeing this, the centurion who was standing opposite him, looking at Jesus, proclaims, surely this man was the Son of God. The centurion who was just in charge of crucifying Jesus, who was probably partaking in the mockery of Jesus, saw this, and something must have changed in his heart. In fact, this is probably the only statement of the identity of Jesus from human lips in the Gospel of Mark that we can trust, because the testimony from Peter kind of falls through in chapter 8. But this guy, something happens in his heart, and he says, surely this man was the Son of God. Mark then moves straight into a moment that it feels strange to us right after that, because it's verse 40. It has nothing to do with his crucifixion. We kind of get a close-up of the centurion, and then we're panning across to people watching far away. And it says some women were there, standing watching from a distance. Mary from Magdala, Mary the mother of James the younger, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him, cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. There's a sense in which Mark is reminding us that there are people, there are women who have subsidized the cost of the ministry of Jesus all along. They've been there this whole time. And whereas the disciples are nowhere to be found, they have gone. They're somewhere, who knows? They are still there. They're witnessing this. And it's likely that we get this account from them, because the disciples aren't there to recount this, to later be penned down in the Gospels. So who was there to lay witness to any of this? Well, these women, these are the storytellers right now. And that logic continues because Jesus is buried. He goes into a tomb. Joseph of Arimathea takes him and lays him into a tomb. And so the women come to anoint Jesus, anoint the body of Jesus. And what we find is that the body isn't there. They arrive, the stone is rolled away. A young man in Mark, other Gospels will clarify that this is an angel or maybe two angels. But in Mark, there's a young man who says, don't be afraid. You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, and he was crucified, but he is risen. He is not here. See the place where they had laid him. So go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee, just as he said in a previous statement. I think it was chapter 14, or was it 10, where he pulls the disciples aside. After I die and I'm going to be raised, I'm going to go ahead of you into Galilee. So he's referring back to that moment, just as he told you. So trembling and bewildered, astonished, amazed, the women flee the tomb, and they said nothing to anyone because they were terrified. That's verse 8 of chapter 16. And that's where the gospel ends. And there's a couple lines of thinking here from scholars. A tremendous amount of effort has been brought to bear on finding the lost ending of the Gospel of Mark, because many people have looked at that and they say, well, that cannot be the right ending. There's got to be more to it for many, many reasons. One, it's jarring. Two, if they didn't say anything to anyone, how do we know anything that happened in this scene? just all sorts of confusion. It doesn't seem like a good ending to many people. Well, we've never found the lost ending to the Gospel of Mark, not to this day, at least. And in our Bibles, most of us will have verses 9 through 20. And you'll have a little note there in your study Bible that the earliest manuscripts do not include Mark 16, verses 9 through 20. It is the fact that some 100 plus years after the Gospel of Mark was written, somebody else thought it was important to add a bit of extra context, a little bit of resolution to the story that felt better. And so they pulled from the other gospel accounts all of the details of the resurrection, ascension, that kind of stuff, and compiled a better ending for the Gospel of Mark. Here are the two lines of thinking primarily. One is that the Gospel of Mark had a damaged scroll that got passed down and copied, and the damage was at the end. So there are, in scrolls, the bottom and the top get attached to reeds, and so you can roll up and roll out. And so if there's any part that gets damaged on a scroll, it's usually the beginning and the end. The middle stuff is usually the safest. And so it could be that we have a missing ending because it got deteriorated or torn or something like that. And so the Gospel of Mark ends abruptly, but there's a missing ending out there that we just haven't found yet. And so we can backfill it with verses 9 through 20 from details from the other Gospels. That's one credible line of thinking, and it's an argument that many hold to. There's another line of thinking where we say that Mark 16, verse 8 is exactly where the Gospel author intended to end the Gospel. I'm in favor of this argument because all throughout, this is a dramatic, shocking gospel that is layered in its interpretation, and it's trying to bring an audience into the story in a really powerful way. And I think that's what's happening here. And quite a few scholars will also argue for this line of thinking, that here at the end of the gospel, Mark is sort of putting the ball in our court. He's sort of saying, okay, you have now heard of the good news about Jesus, the Anointed One, the Son of God. You've heard the good news that the kingdom has arrived, that the time has come. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to run and tell no one and be afraid? Or are you going to see? Are you going to hear? Are you going to follow along the way? Are you going to go to the nations and proclaim the good news like Jesus has commanded? The choice is yours.